Hey there, comic book friends, I'm Travis. It's time for a little special here. I've been tagged in a video by Read 'em Steven. It is a for creator comics tag where we're supposed to talk about what creators it is that got us into collecting comics. And just right off the bat, that's an extremely hard question to answer. At least it is for me. I don't know if that's my breadth of the amount of time that I've read comics, which clearly you'd think, well, that really shouldn't matter because we're talking about what first got us into reading comics. And I don't know, I really, there were a few early on creators, but to tell you the truth, as far as my initial collecting, when I first started collecting comics, it was definitely more of what got me into collecting comics was my peers at the time. Ended up befriending a group of guys who were all seemingly much heavier into comics than I was at the time. They influenced me to actually, I didn't have a poll before that, I really didn't know what one was. And so those friends influenced me to really truly get the monthly comic, get them every month, have a serialized story and that sort of thing, and characters. Those are the first things. I didn't pay so much close attention to who was creating the books that I was reading for the longest time into the mid to late 80s. I didn't really pay a whole lot of attention as to who it was that was making a book. It was more about the characters that were in the book, as far as what I got. Probably the first, and I'm going to cheat here right off the bat, isn't that great? The first creator, and in my case creators, to get me hooked on collecting comics, actually actively seeking out the books, and getting each issue every month and going back and hunting down back issues and that sort of thing was Marv Wolfman and George Perez, Teen Titans. I had been, this era, been collecting lots of Batman, Spider-Man. I couldn't tell you who was on those books, who was the creators were on most of that stuff. Yeah, so I was collecting some of that stuff, here and there, bouncing around on different things, and but those are the two first creators that really stand out in my mind as influential for me to collect comics as a monthly purchase, to make sure I get that next one, the serialized story that's there and stuff. Some of that is the same with the X-Men too, but X-Men purchases were more of a sporadic buy. I'd buy a couple issues and read them and then go back and find things to fill in. But those Teen Titans, that was huge. Read all of that. The Titans run went backwards from where I started at and hunted down back issues of what I needed to with the Teen Titans when they moved to, I distinctly remember comics becoming 75 cents, that being a huge deal, the Teen Titans going to a quote-unquote deluxe format, different type of paper, higher quality as far as that stuff, and collected all the Teen Titans all the way along, clearly mostly because it had Marv Wolfman and George Perez, and to me their names are synonymous. They're kind of together. I know they aren't now. Each of them does their own work and that sort of thing, but in my head they'll always be one entity for me in my world of comics. Of course, they went on to write what I still think is the greatest, probably the greatest event book ever. And probably the first, really, as far as the big earth-shattering, universe-moving kind of thing, with Crisis on Infinite Earth. And you just, incredible work done there by both creators. made such a lasting impact on and they were the first creators that I really followed, paid attention to, was really excited about, and whatnot. And like I said, most of my collecting through the 80s and clear up into, we get into the late 80s, was really about character. It was never about who the creator was. I mean, now I'm educated. I can tell you who it was that was doing that stuff. I can tell you stuff that's before that influences my purchasing now. But at the time, that was the core thing that got me started. Until, like I said, the mid 80s. Then the mid 80s hit, and for me, it was like a magical time of comics. I was exposed to a lot of what I felt like was me. That was where my head space was at. Where it was the more out there story that I wanted to read and experience and stuff like that. Love superheroes, but it just always felt like there should be more. And to be quite honest, during this time, I was not a big reader outside of comic books. Due to mild dyslexia and stuff like that, reading was always a challenge to me for the longest time until I figured out my own way of operating and getting what I needed for it all to work for me. So I didn't have this breadth of clearly all this other literature that's out there that I've since read a lot of and whatnot. Comics was the first exposure to a lot of that type of thing. Not so roundabout way. So the late 80s show up, 87, 88, that era of books. Of course, we have The Watchmen rolling in, and that knew it was something special, wasn't sure exactly what it was. Guaranteed at the age I was at the time, I was not getting the maximum mileage out of Watchmen that clearly as a longer reader and an older person, I get much more mileage out of. But midway through that came out a book called Hellblazer, and it was, to me, felt significantly different than everything else that was on the shelf, and that influenced what I buy to this day. And that creator is Jamie Delano, the writer for Hellblazer. He was on basically the first 40 issues of Hellblazer. There's a couple issues in between that 1 through 40 that somebody stepped in for a single one-shot type thing. But otherwise, that entire run is his. And that part of the run had a lot of political weight in it. And I liked a lot of that. The depicting of the corporate financier as basically being the devil or influenced by the devil, and those sorts of things, along with the other occult stuff that was going on, just all really appealed to me. And so, I mean, that changed what I was looking for pretty significantly in comics. And to this day, Jamie went on to write a lot of other Vertigo titles over the year. I think he's still writing stuff now. I haven't read anything new of his in a very long time. I think has read or is writing one of the Borderland books, for instance. I think most of his stuff has some sort of a occult, dark type spin to it. But that, I think, was probably the first thing that really opened my doors to other stuff. As far as there being other stuff out there, I was ranting about the first issue to everyone I could about how awesome this was, about how different it was, and I think most of my friends read it. I don't know that they were engrossed in it as much. I remember the next year, because that was like January of 88, I think was when issue 1 came out. I remember it's like the next year, it's like January of 89. Sandman came out, and then everybody was ranting about Sandman. I always thought that Hellblazer was a better book. The entire time that Sandman was coming out, I enjoyed Hellblazer more. So that's my second creator, Jamie Delano, as far as writer go, to initially get me where I'm at and why I'm collecting what I'm collecting. I give him large credit. I also give Grant Morrison Huge influence on what I read and what I collect to this day. And my first real exposure of Grant Morrison was I was not getting his Animal Man. I actually read Jamie Delando's Animal Man first, which was in the 50s, and then went backwards later on to read Grant Morrison's Animal Man. But he took over Doom Patrol, and not that I knew that really at the time. For me, it was more a matter of the covers were so out there for Doom Patrol that I started picking it up because of that. But immediately it was the writing, it was the story that was being told, it was the parodies that were going on in there, it was some of the tongue-in-cheek stuff that was going on, and some of the other serious overtones amongst the insanity that really influenced me and what I read going forward. Also from there, just his style of things, to the point where during that era, I was seeking out Grant Morrison's short stories. He was having short stories published places and stuff, so I was buying anthology books and actual just straight literature to read those types of stories that he had going on other places. So my third person is Grant Morrison, and my fourth person that probably got me started collecting in the way I collect now, and the stuff I like to collect and stuff, really is Mobius. I picked up in this late 80s era also, with all this other incredible stuff that's going on. I picked up some clearly he's a French artist, so I picked up some American reprints of some of his work, and he's the real deal all the way around. Writer, artist, just amazing, and the breadth of his work once I discovered him, and the first two books of his I got, one was a Western of sorts. It wasn't Blueberry, but it was a gambling on the Mississippi, paddle boat type of a story, and it was very Western-esque. And then the next thing I got was some sort of French avant-garde space alternate world strange story being told, and to know that was the same creator writing and drawing all of that, and his styles were so significantly different, quickly became a huge influence in just what kinds of different stories that could be told. And to this day I do not own enough of his work. I've either found it hard to come by, or at the time very cost prohibitive to hunt it down. And of course now I'm having this conversation and thinking about that stuff again whets my appetite to, how much energy should I put into trying to find some of that stuff. I would love to own original issues of Blueberry, his Western, which his Western alone, the breadth of artistic change that he did over that time is amazing, and then for him to go on and do the heavy metal type stuff, and just the stuff that he was doing, and incredible, clear up until his death. I mean, you'd think that he had so many years in of pencils and pen and inks and paints and whatnot, that would be what he did. But when he embraced the technology as it moved along. I mean, I actually remember watching a video of him being one of the first artists I ever saw that was using the Wacom, to digitally draw his work, which I just thought that was incredible that somebody, in their late 60s would be on the forefront of doing that type of stuff. So that's the other one I'm going to claim as being my other influence in my collecting. There's a ton of other creators I love dearly. I read and collect large amounts of their stuff. They continue to build on the influences of what my desires and tastes are in reading. J.J. Mulliff, an incredible watercolor artist during that same era, widened my breadth of artistic taste in comics and in sequential art dramatically. Other writers, people like Peter Milligan in 1990 when he rebranded Shade the Changing Man and brought out this incredibly insane comic book of just, over the top insanity as reality kind of folds on itself and creates this totally bizarre thing. And I've been a Peter Milligan fan, ever since then. Whatever he's doing, I'm picking it up until I'm thoroughly disgusted by it, basically. Trying to think, there's so many people who came out in the late 80s that just really changed for me what the idea of a comic could be so much. But yeah, I mean, I go on forever as far as great creators go and that sort of thing. So we'll stick with those, with Jamie Delano, Grant Morrison, Marv Wolfman, and George Perez. I know that's cheating, and Mobius as my four that I'm going to stick with. Very hard to come up with creators that influence my collecting. Probably be easier for me to have pulled titles that influence my further collecting. But yeah. It's been fun doing this. It was fun thinking about it for a few days as to exactly what that is. I'm sure in a week I will change my mind and tell you it's other people that are those things. Or, like I said, my laundry list of who that could be would go on much, much longer. I am going to tag, because I'm curious as to what other people's comic collecting influences are. I kind of know who some of these people's, what some of them are, but I'm sure there are probably others that influence them that I'd be curious about, and I'm hoping to hear what those are, because probably I'll be hunting down whatever it is that they talked about that influenced them. But the three people I'm going to name is teebird. Curious to see what you were reading first, what the influences were. They got you collecting. Sleepy Reader, Damien. Curious to see what it is. I know that there's probably some Buscema, Conan in there and some stuff like that, but what else was influencing your collecting at the time? And Mike, Sgt Merica, want to know what it is that got you hooked, and who the creators were that piqued your interest in reading comics, and heck, anybody else. Clearly there's lots of you that I love watching videos and I love talking books with, and if I'm only supposed to name 3, that means there's a ton of you that I leave out here. Hopefully you get picked up along the way. If you don't get picked up along the way, make the video anyway, tag some people anyway, and because I'm curious. I'm always curious to see what it is. I mean, like I said, a lot of you, I know your early comic buys were, but what do you think of the creators that influenced it? So it's an interesting thought on, and take on the whole, what started you out in comics. So, so I'm curious what it is when you start seeing creators as being the influence, as opposed to like characters, for instance. Anyway, have a great one, everybody. Thanks for watching, and catch you in another video. Catch you in your video. Bye.